Bhaal is the dark god of slaying and violent death in the Forgotten Realms, known and feared as the Lord of Murder. He's one of the infamous Dead Three, alongside Bane, the tyrant god of fear, and Myrkul, the Lord of the Dead. A trio of mortals turned deities who once conspired to carve up the powers of an ancient god. Utterly vile and sadistic, Bhaal exists only to hunt and kill, taking a perverse delight in slaughter for its own sake. His story is a blood-soaked saga of ascension, downfall, and resurrection. Not so dissimilar from Bane, of course, which we covered in our last video. Since all of the Dead Three have similar beginnings, I will not repeat their story of ascension. Instead, if you haven't seen it already, I do recommend watching our video on Bane, where we cover how all three of them grew to become gods. I will do instead just a very small summary. Long before he was a god, Bhaal was a ruthless mortal man with an insatiable lust for power. In the earliest days of recorded history, Bhaal and two companions, Bane and Myrkul, sought to usurp the portfolios of Jurgal, the ancient god of the dead. As legend tells, Jurgal grew bored of his throne and offered it to the three mortal challengers, who couldn't decide amongst themselves who should rule. At Jurgal's urging, they settled the matter with a dark game of chance, casting dice with the skulls of the dead. Bane won and claimed dominion over hatred, strife, and tyranny. Myrkul took the rulership of the dead, and Bhaal, coming in last, chose the realm of death and murder. Thus, Bhaal achieved divine ascension, becoming the new god of murder in the Faerunian pantheon. Once ascended, Bhaal reveled in his portfolio of blood. He was counted among the lesser deities, but his cult of killers spread fear across Faerun. Bhaal was violent, cruel, and utterly without mercy, filled with a savage bloodlust and driven by an overpowering need to kill and destroy whenever living beings were near. Other gods found him loathsome. Deities of goodness like Tyr, Lathander, and Ilmater all opposed Bhaal. In contrast, the Maiden of Pain, Leviatar, and the Mistress of the Seas, Talona, served him. And then in turn, Bhaal deferred to the greater power of Bane, his former companion, whom he obeyed whenever it was needed. Now, during this period, Bhaal often walked the world through horrifying avatars that reflected his lust for death. In cities, he took on the guise of the Slayer, appearing as a pale, feral-looking corpse with ivory skin and weeping black blood that oozed from self-inflicted cuts. At least that's how it was described in the old lore. Of course, you probably know the Slayer form as the powerful transformation that followers of Bhaal can undergo in games like Baldur's Gate 3, a transformation that makes you look like a Deathclaw-looking monster. Funnily enough, if you look at the Faith and Pantheons book, a lore book for 2nd edition, it is described as a, quote, human male corpse with a feral face, end quote. Not quite the monster that we see here, as this is, well, certainly not a human male. Though I have read interpretations of the Slayer form in that it is meant to be understood more like a humanoid rather than a human, or that this transformation is meant to be human-sized, not literally human-shaped. But regardless, this form was of course also seen in its more monstrous version back in Baldur's Gate 2, where it looked much like it does now. But anyhow, Bhaal takes this Slayer form exclusively in urban areas, as it is more maneuverable in dense streets and tight corridors, which is very important since his other forms are a bit, more intense. In the wilderness, Bhaal favors the Ravager form, a towering 30-foot-tall horned giant wreathed in a mane of hair and a beard, bearing eyes that burn with infernal flames. And then he has another, a monstrosity called Khazgoroth, which is set upon the Moonshae Isles. Disguised as a great beast, Khazgoroth corrupted the land and raised an army of fiends, undead, and bloodthirsty monstrosities to destroy the local people. An attack he made against Shantia, the goddess of life and bounty, who had a very strong following in the area. And well, that was basically his MO for a very long time, taking on the shapes of really cool avatars and then just unleashing murder whenever he could. I mean, he is the god of murder after all, and this is an important distinction that I feel like I should make at this point. Bhaal is not the god of assassinations. Now, all assassinations are indeed murder, of course, but not all murders are assassinations. An assassination implies premeditation. It implies a target. It implies that there is a reason for that target, a purpose that, when satisfied, no other assassination might be needed after the fact. But that is not what Bhaal is. It's not what his portfolio dictates. He is murder, many of which can have a purpose, of course, and many of it does, but also much of which is simply senseless killing. Death for death's sake. And death did Bhaal mate, much to others of course, but also, interestingly some, even done to him. Hey fellas, I have some very exciting news. So I talked a little bit about it on my last video, but it is finally official that I am opening a Patreon. See, very often I cover topics here on the channel that are simply not directly referenced in 5th edition. Whether it is old lore, spells from old editions, creatures whose features are not clearly represented in their stat block, creatures that don't even have a stat block. I mean, how often have you heard me talk of things that we all wish that we had in 5th edition, but we don't? Well, let me give you the answer. It happens very often. When we did the video on the City of Diz, wouldn't you have wanted to have, like, playable content for the city? When we covered Venger, the Force of Evil, or Inferno, the most powerful dragon in Dungeons & Dragons, wouldn't you have wanted to have, like, actual stat blocks, like layers and minions, true to lore, that you could actually play with? Well, I have not just thought about this many times, I have desperately wanted this many times. And this is what this Patreon is really all about. Every single time that I upload a video, a content packet will be sent to all of you who subscribe to the Patreon, containing like actual usable content that directly relates to the topic of the video, with each packet containing both player content and DM content. So for example, our last video was about Bane, the Lord of Tyranny. Well, right now, we do have a packet live that you can access containing the Dreadmaster, a subclass for clerics inspired by the Dreadmaster cleric subclass that was released decades ago in 2nd edition. And of course, it comes along with spells directly inspired by those that Bane gave his clerics. And for DMs, we have rules on how to handle a campaign centered on the Lord of Tyranny, how best to terrorize the land and your players, how to corrupt ethical standards and virtues and ideals such that, your players might start believing that the bad guy may have a point. And of course, a big stat block for you to use for the grand finale. See, legally speaking, I cannot tell you that any of this is literally for Bane, and it isn't, but what I can tell you is that this is a pretty good, entirely new creation made by me, inspired by Bane, which should suffice for you perfectly if you wish to roleplay or use Bane in your adventures, and the same will apply for any and all of my future packets. So check me out, please, if you can, at Mr. Rex on Patreon and sign up to start gaining access and receiving some of these new packets. We are running with just a single tier, which you can subscribe to in order to obtain everything. As part of the project, I will also be adding in tons of Sands of Doom content for those of you that are, and I know that you guys are there, thirsty for more of that. Currently, I am releasing a player guide for Sands of Doom that a GM seeking to run the adventure can just give to their players to let them know, like what the adventure is all about, what to expect, and what to build, as well as new backgrounds that are exclusive to the adventure. We have a new packet dropping in today as well for Bhaal, as we're going to be doing again for every single video, so look out for it. Thank you all so much for your support, and I hope that you enjoy all of the cool new content that I'll be able to create with this new setup and with your endless support, so thank you so much. And now, back to the video. See, roughly 150 years ago to the present day, the gods were forced to walk the earth during the cataclysm known as the Time of Troubles. The Tablets of Fate, a powerful artifact from Eo, the overgod of all gods, was stolen, and so all of the gods were cast down to the lands of mortals for their inaction and indifference, not to return until the tablets were found and returned. See, Bhaal was already weakened, severely so as a result of his defeat early on his attack at the Moonshae Isles, where the hero Tristan, the High King of the Folk, wielded the sword Siemric Huge, and then slayed the avatar of Bhaal that contained, at that point, a greater fraction than normal of the god's essence. So when the gods were eventually then forced to walk the earth, it is said that Bhaal was only merely a killing force able to possess mortals, rather than your typical, powerful avatar that many of the other gods were able to possess at the time. And then to compound on this, Bane, who at the time Bhaal was subservient to, ended up sacrificing a large portion of Bhaal's clergy in order to obtain the power he needed to fight the god Torm, an encounter that we actually covered lightly on our last video. But the point is, the Lord of Murder was severely weakened, and without much of his clergy, he didn't have much power, and he knew that he would not last long. In fact, Bhaal foresaw his very own demise, and took measures to prevent his own inevitable death. Measures he took in secret. a measure that we will cover in just a bit. But for now, know that after Bane, the god of tyrants, died at the hands of Torm, Bhaal made a pact with Merkle to find the tablets, and in fact, Bhaal did indeed collect one of the 2 tablets before he was, well, murdered by a man named Cyric, using the sword God's Bane. In that very moment, Cyric murdered the god of murder himself, a move that allowed him to subsume Bhaal's divine portfolio. And so, when Cyric was elevated to divinity shortly thereafter for doing that, he was able to take, among several other portfolios, command over the realm of murder. Bhaal was murdered at the Borskir Bridge on the river called Winding Water. You can actually find the bridge here. It, of course, became quite an important bridge because of the momentous event that happened there, the death of a god and the rise of another. And so, in commemoration, a statue of Cyric was erected on one end of the bridge, and then a statue of Bhaal on the other. In due time, of course, the statues were destroyed by those upset that such evil gods were being seemingly honored with statues, but, in order not to upset Cyric, who at the time was seen as particularly powerful, the statues were surely repaired and made even grander the second time around. It is believed that a portion of Bhaal's tainted blood actually fell into the river and tainted it, and its waters have since run poisonous, and continue to remain so until this day. So, was that it then? The end of Bhaal, the god of murder? Well, not quite. Like I said, he had a plan that was not so dissimilar to Bane's, but perhaps even more grandiose, or at least way cooler. While Bhaal wandered the mortal world during the time of troubles, he actually seduced a lot of women from all across the realms, women of all races and creeds, in order to sire countless children with them. Children who each would bear a small portion of his own divine essence. These children would henceforth be known as the Bhaalspawn. See, a prophecy was made, which went something like this. The Lord of Murder shall perish, but in his doom he shall spawn a score of mortal progeny. Chaos will be sown from their passing. See, this is the thing. Bhaal had a plan. By instilling his own divine essence into these children, he would grant them power, as well as a modicum of his own desires and personality, like a portion of himself. He knew that they would covet more, forcing them to seek others like them with which to murder, thereby stealing their divine essence in order to add to their own. He wanted them to believe that perhaps, by killing each other, they could absorb each other's essence, or that when only one of these Bhaalspawn was left, that they would then rise as the new god of murder. The truth was that whenever a Bhaalspawn died, their soul would be released onto the ether, and when all Bhaalspawn died, their souls would gather all together, complete, and restore Bhaal as the true and only god of murder. In other words, Bhaal sought to try and actually have all these children kill each other, in order to speed up the process and have his soul, splintered as it was, reconnect together as soon as they all died. Quote, "It is said that the children of Bhaal are claimed throughout their sleep, ever disturbed by visions of a life of bloodshed and terror. Once they have seen too much, once these dreams drive their minds to break, they are beset by the Slayer." End quote. Bhaalspawn looked like normal members of their race. They're just normal people with nothing seemingly different about them. Except, of course, that a part of their souls were divine. Over time, this would become evident to them. It would grant them superpowers and would also tempt them into evil and murder. Seeing as all personalities, of course, in real life, but also in the Forgotten Realms, are very varied, reactions to this revelation would shift dramatically from person to person, as some of these Bhaalspawn would fall to temptation of power, while others would hide it into the darkest recesses of their soul. But this was the start of the Bhaalspawn crisis, an age where the Bhaalspawn would create destruction and mayhem in order to seek one another and, well, murder each other. Now, the Bhaalspawn saga basically goes hand in hand with Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, and I suppose partly 3, because there are also Bhaalspawn, as you all know, in that game. But it is effectively the backdrop for all of these games. Now, the key character here, when it comes to this particular saga, is none other than Savarok, a fearsome warlord that sought to destabilize the region and bring war in order to become the new Bhaal incarnate by slaughtering enough souls. He basically believed that if he slayed enough, he would become the new Bhaal. Now, the main character of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, who by chance also happens to be a Bhaalspawn himself, is of course able to thwart the villain and restore order in Baldur's Gate. And then later on, things take a deeper turn in Baldur's Gate 2, Throne of Bhaal, which is one of the expansions of the game, when the Five, a cabal of powerful Bhaalspawn warlords, begin carving a path of destruction across Tethyr. Entire cities are annihilated in their path to absorb all of the divine essence of their dead siblings. Now, to keep it short, the climactic events of the Throne of Bhaal expansion saw nearly all of the Bhaalspawn exterminated in a great struggle known as the Bhaalspawn Crisis. In the end, almost all of Bhaal's progeny, whether they were wicked or innocent, were killed or absorbed, releasing their divine souls back to the god of murder. The last Bhaalspawn standing, canonically the main character of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, resisted the murderous impulses of his heritage, refusing to become a monstrosity or a deity. In the end, the hero declined the chance to take up on Bhaal's mantle, instead choosing a mortal life as a beloved hero of Baldur's Gate. With that choice, it appeared that Bhaal's grand plan had been foiled, his essence dispersed and locked away, unable to fully manifest so long as some fragment remained in a living child. In other words, for so long as a Bhaalspawn remained alive, for as long as the main character of Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 remained alive, Bhaal could never truly resurrect. After the death of Bhaal and the end of the Bhaalspawn Wars, the influence of the Lord of Murder lingered in the shadows. Bhaal's church and cultists were thrown into disarray by the loss of their deity. In civilized areas, most of Bhaal's surviving faithful converted to the worship of Cleric, reasoning that Cleric now held the portfolio of murder. However, many of Bhaal's rural and secret followers refused to forsake him. These zealots continued their rituals in hidden shrines, claiming that they still received spells from Bhaal in answer to their midnight prayers, which of course was actually Cleric sending those spells. But tension mounted between the Clericist converts and the secret Bhaal loyalists, such that merely just 10 years after the Time of Troubles, the rival factions were literally at each other's throats, ambushing and assassinating one another in the night. And so, then, about 20 years after the Time of Troubles, only a few isolated cult cells of Bhaal remained in Faerûn, all set in remote corners. Many of these degenerate fanatics went to ground, hiding their worship and waiting for any omen, any sign that the Lord of Murder might someday return. One infamous sect, the Deathstalkers of Bhaal, persisted in secret, undertaking horrific rituals to try and resurrect Bhaal despite the apparent failure of the Bhaalspawn Prophecy. Now, for over a century, it was believed that Bhaal's essence had been completely and permanently dispersed or trapped, and that any chance of his resurrection was at this point lost. But in truth, the seeds of his return only lay dormant, awaiting the proper blood-soaked catalyst to begin it. That catalyst, of course, came in 1482 DR, so nearly 100 years after the Bhaalspawn Crisis and only about 20 years from the present day. Abdel Adrian, the canonical main character from Baldur's Gate 1 and 2, and one of the only two last known Bhaalspawn left, was a popular Grand Duke of Baldur's Gate and an old man. The other surviving Bhaalspawn, a crazed assassin named Vie Kong, ambushed Abdel in public at a marketplace in Baldur's Gate. Now, accounts differ on which man won their desperate duel, but the outcome was still one and the same. One Bhaalspawn slew the other, and the victor ended up transforming into a massive blood-soaked creature that would go on to begin a murderous rampage. In that terrible moment, Bhaal's essence, at last free of any living host, coalesced into the Slayer, an avatar of the Lord of Murder. The monster was only defeated when a group of adventurers banded together to destroy it, putting an end to the carnage, but of course also releasing the soul of Bhaal. And then, with all of his children dead, at last, Bhaal's divinity was fully released, enabling the god's true resurrection. The year 1482 DR marked the return of Bhaal to the mortal world. And if you're curious, this event actually takes place in the book Murder in Baldur's Gate, which you can definitely read if you want to. But now, upon his revival, Bhaal immediately reclaimed the divine portfolio of murder from Cleric, who had held it since the Time of Troubles. Cleric's theft of Bhaal's domain was thus undone. The god of murder had come to claim his crown again. However, Bhaal did not regain all his former strength. Like his fellow Dead 3 compatriots, Bane and Merkel, Bhaal's rebirth left him in a kind of quasi-divine state. In effect, and for reasons not fully explained, the Dead 3 became demigod-like entities who could operate on the earthly plane with presumably weaker powers than they once wielded. This mattered little to Bhaal's fanatics, for their murderous patron was indeed back, and blood would flow anew, such that by 1492 DR, Baldur's Gate and the surrounding region suffered a sudden surge of gruesome killings, unmistakably the work of Bhaal's cultists. The Lord of Murder had reclaimed his throne, and the spree of slaughter will begin again in his name, which of course sets us right up into the events of Baldur's Gate 3, which we will cover a little bit on our next episode, not on this one. So stay tuned for that. But now, let's move our topic onto something a little bit more practical: the priesthood of Bhaal. Now, throughout all of these divine upheavals, the Church of Bhaal, also called the Cult of Murder, has persisted in one form or another. In the past, Bhaal's organized religion was relatively small, especially compared to Bane's or Merkel's, but it was intensely fanatical and, of course, violent. The clergy of Bhaal are known as Bhaalists or Balin, the latter term more common in the eastern Inner Sea lands. But rather than a single unified hierarchy, they instead form a disorderly network of local murderous cells. Each temple or cult leader basically operates independently, connected only loosely by their common devotion to the god. Now, what binds all Bhaalists together is their philosophy of murder. They believe that murder is not only a sacrament that honors Bhaal, but also a thrilling game to be savored. Every priest of Bhaal is expected to commit at least one murder every 10 days, typically in the darkest hours before dawn. Failure to perform regular killings is seen as weakness or heresy, and if you fail to do your killings one 10-day, it basically carries over so that you have to do twice as many killings the next 10-day. As one murderous prayer intones, Bhaal awaits thee, Bhaal embraces thee. None escape Bhaal. Words often chanted as the killer delivers the fatal strike. Bhaal's followers conduct their killings with gruesome ritualism. After each murder, a priest of Bhaal will draw the skull of Bhaal, which is the logo of the god, into the blood of the victim, and then smear that blood onto their own hands as a sign of devotion. If the ritual is performed properly, and if the killing was done properly, the blood is said to vanish supernaturally from the priest's hands, which is in turn a sign of Bhaal's favor. Now, the faithful also pray to Bhaal directly before laying down to sleep and whenever they are about to set out to commit a killing. In particular, when they do so at night, it's called a day's farewell, and it is generally a ritual that the entire congregation does together. Now, advancement within the cult's ranks literally requires murder, as you can imagine. To gain a promotion, a priest must perform a very special, initiation rite, which is basically just a killing. However, it's a little bit special, a little bit different. They go and try to slay a victim in a ritualistic manner, only using their bare hands and alone, without any weapons and without any magic. Afterwards, they're expected to return and basically explain to the clergy how they did the killing and the circumstances that led to and after the killing. There is basically then a ritual, a communion that is done to Bhaal, and if Bhaal accepts the killing as appropriate, then you have the appropriate promotion of the assassin. Now, the leader of a Bhaalist congregation, regardless of however they might want to call themselves, they're often titled the High Primate, or for women, it is the High Primistress, which it's interesting because the name High Primate is so odd that literally in the book, when they explain the title, they literally poke fun at the fact that it's such a weird title. They literally write that down on the paper. So it's kind of canon that it's just a little bit odd. But anyways, the High Primates direct networks of assassins and cutthroats, sometimes operating from secret strongholds, which of course they kind of have to, being assassins and all. And then on the rare occasion that any of Bhaal's church would observe a calendar holy day, it is usually done so on the Feast of the Moon, which is a night when the cult members would honor the dead and then celebrate particularly spectacular murders by recounting those tales to one another. They basically just gather together and just try to one-up each other with the coolest assassinations that they have ever done. And it is funny that also the lore actually covers what would be an example of an extraordinary killing. It seems that at one point the clerics of Bhaal considered this, which I'm about to explain, to be the greatest murder ever committed. Now, I will just give you the story, exactly how it appears in the lore, because it is kind of insane, but here it goes. quote, Utheodol teleported to appear in mid-air in front of a Pegasus riding palace guard, slew the man, and rode his steed forcibly down to its death, smashing through a skylight into the throne room. Utheodol leapt clear of the Pegasus as the king's archers peppered it with shafts, and rode a prepared flight magic down to plunge into one eye of the king's guardian's black dragon. He slew the great drake with his own still secret destroying fist spell, known to be a small localized disintegrate effect, and rode its involuntary dying breath across the throne room, gliding along the stream of acid it breathed, protected by his enchanted armor. As the armor blackened, crumbled, and fell away, Utheodol cast a spell that flung all arrows in the room, even those not yet fired, into swarming flight. He then sprang to meet the king in single combat with his lone dagger against Semite's broadsword. It is recorded that Utheodol slew every guard who came against him as he slashed the unfortunate monarch's skin in hundreds of places. He then cast a spell that forced the king into a veritable dance of death so that he fell lifeless from exsanguination. The priest mage then cast 2 entrapping spells and teleported away. The first trap was a meteor swarm, activated whenever any spell was next cast on the throne room. It slew 4 court wizards of note. The second was a blade barrier said to erupt into being when someone who was blood kin to the king next entered the room. It slew the king's 2 eldest sons. End quote. That is the most insane set of consecutive murders that I have literally ever heard of. That's apparently the kind of shit that these guys honor in the dark halls of their clergy, and the kinds of stories that they tell each other. But now, moving on, beyond fulfilling murder quotas, Bhaal's clergy spend their days meticulously planning assassinations and honing their killing skills. They scout targets and study the impact that each death that they provide might have. The high primates, in particular, scheme to eliminate rivals and instill terror in communities. But they do so with cult strategy rather than mindless carnage. Random slaughter is always discouraged. Instead, the church prefers select killings that would spread maximum fear or eliminate threats to the cult. The ultimate goal is always to make common folk fear Bhaal so deeply that they would offer gold or valuables to the church, in exchange, of course, of being spared. Through terror and extortion, Bhaalists enrich themselves and the church, even as they sow death. Now, to maintain their bloody work, many Bhaalist clergy pose as mercenaries, bounty hunters, or members of assassin guilds. The church historically has sponsored countless murder networks, such as the infamous Shadow Thieves of and the Citadel of Assassins in the Galena Mountains. Even after Bhaal's death, those organizations carried on a legacy of paid killings and still whispered prayers to Bhaal, and of course later Cyric, during their bloody business. This type of cell-like structure of independent assassins means that the Church of Bhaal often operates from the shadows, with no single open headquarter or target that they can all relate to or target at the same time, basically. In cities, lone Bhaalist priests or small cabals, they just simply quietly orchestrate their own murders for hire, while in the wilderness, roving priests of death hunt travelers or lead depraved bandits to slaughter everything in their wake. Under Bhaal's doctrine, any place can become a killing ground, but the church does maintain very specific temples and shrines in very specific locations. In urban areas, Bhaalist temples are usually secret subterranean complexes, dark, torchlit dungeons beneath city streets. These lairs are usually sparsely furnished, often with nothing more than stone chambers and alcoves decorated with mosaics or sculptures of horrific murders. Many such sites feature vaults or charnel rooms filled with the corpses of victims whose bodies the priest couldn't publicly display. These crypts serve both as trophy halls and undead spawning pits, as the dead are sometimes reanimated by unholy rites. A Bhaalist temple in a city would also maintain an ossuary of morbid tokens taken from victims, usually skulls, bones, or any kind of personal effect taken from those they have murdered, all of course to glorify Bhaal. Now, on the other hand, the rural worshippers, by contrast, use consecrated remote shrines, usually on bleak hilltops or other desolate sites. These have crude altars, usually in big blood-stained stones that typically are surrounded by a ring of weathered rocks carved to resemble skulls with teardrops, which is of course a homage to the actual symbol of Bhaal. Travelers in isolated areas who stumble upon these altars, of course, often are met by a swift end, as the resident priest would then use them to fulfill the next sacrificial murder. Now, Bhaal's priests are dressed to evoke death itself. It's what they attempt to do. In ceremonies or on temple duty, you usually see all Bhaalian wearing hooded robes and cowls of deep black or deep purple. Now what they do is inside of their veils, they cover their faces in black gauze or any kind of dark clothing to basically obscure their face. And so what this does is, to an onlooker that would see them, it would make it so that they would look as if they didn't have a face. So it's all just darkness inside of the cowl. This macabre kind of costume is made so that every single cultist basically just looks like an executioner or some kind of living shadow, which again just spreads fear about what's really going on in the temples of Bhaal. Every cleric usually carries a distinctive curved ceremonial dagger at their belt. However, these daggers are usually only used for killing by the actual senior clergy of these temples. They're not expected to ever be used by combat, particularly not so by the lower ranking priests. If you're a lower cultist of Bhaal, you're expected to have your actual own more practical weapons to be able to deal with your murders. It would be far more likely for you to see cultists of Bhaal use these serrated daggers more like a focus for their spells rather than as an actual tool for killing. Now I should point out though that when it comes to actually going out to do missions, or in particular if you have a cultist of Bhaal that is like an adventurer, it is perfectly acceptable for them to don whatever armor or whatever gear it is suitable for them to do battle with. But also if they're going into the city, it is perfectly reasonable for them to just dress themselves in whatever way they would have to do in order to just pass unseen amongst the populace. There is no restriction that they have to look like shadows or anything like that all the time. Now lastly, when it comes to talking about the church, there is an interesting and very unique sect of specialty priests, which are called the Deathstalkers. These are basically devotees who train explicitly as holy assassins that are granted very special powers from Bhaal. So these would be the kinds of assassins that would not just try and stab their enemies, but would actually have magical spells granted to them by Bhaal, as well as, again, supernatural powers. In particular, these Deathstalkers are granted the ability such that if they stab a person with a dagger, they would have a chance to instantly and just automatically kill their target. A divine blessing where a single strike can just end and completely kill a person. Then senior stalkers, those that are higher in the ranking, are given the ability to plane shift all the way through Bhaal's own domain in Gehenna. They can basically step into the lower planes momentarily and then reappear in the mortal world in a distant location, effectively allowing them to teleport by traveling through the plane of the damned. What this does is it allows Bhaal's top murderers to basically bypass barriers or be able to escape pursuit by traveling to the realm of their god. And then the most eldest of Deathstalkers can even summon aerial servants, invisible planar entities, to hunt down targets in secret, essentially employing a form of unseen supernatural hitman at Bhaal's behest. But yeah, beyond these abilities, of course, Bhaal's clergy, they also wield specific spells that are unique to their faith, often reflecting the themes of murder and, of course, decay. 3 of the examples that are given to us in the old lore are: 1. Attraction, a 2nd level spell. So this is a charm spell that Bhaalist would use to manipulate and lure victims. It magically turns their target's hatred into love for the caster, or vice versa, by turning affection into hatred. This is generally useful for getting close to unsuspecting prey, or to be able to turn friends into foes by making it so that 2 enemies that might be attacking you suddenly hate each other. It's a very powerful spell. And then there is a spell Decay, a morbid spell that basically rapidly ages and deteriorates objects, turning sturdy items to rust. Now, while it doesn't actually harm people, like you cannot use to decay flesh, for example, a priest of Bhaal can use it to weaken doors or weaken weapons. They can cause enemy armor to rot. They can make it so that evidence is completely destroyed by rotting away clothing or documents. They are able to effectively weaken magical items so that their enemies cannot use them. It's just also a very overall effective spell. And then lastly, we have the spell Wound, a 5th level spell. So this is one of the most feared spells that Bhaal gives to his supporters. This spell basically grants the cleric the ability to murder from far away, but without leaving evidence of their deed. The spell functions like a harm spell, but the wounds that are inflicted by the spell leave no type of like physical contact or physical evidence. So this basically allows a priest to just go around and kill people without ever even being seen. It's very, very strong. But yeah, there you have it. From his first rise into godhood, Through his death and rebirth, Bhaal's influence in the Forgotten Realms, and of course at Baldur's Gate more than all, has been nothing short of ghastly and far-reaching. He is the embodiment of murder as an art and a sacrament, a deity who literally gains power when innocent blood is spilled. His loyalists, whether the original Deathstalkers or modern-day maniacs like Orin Savrok, are united by a love of killing and a promise that Bhaal will reward them in kind. Though he was once thought of destroyed, Bhaal's dark saga proves that evil can never be truly vanquished. It merely lies in wait, sharpening its knives for the next opportunity. So long as mortals harbor hatred and the desire to kill, the Lord of Murder will never be without worshippers or victims. In the shadows of every alley where an assassin lurks, and in every whispered prayer for death, Bhaal lives on, eager to revel in the next bloody deed committed in his vile name.